I will talk about uses of video kind of broadly and historically first. I'm going to give you a quick history of some of this, and along the way we'll look at a few examples of work from early on to more modern times, and then I'm going to show you a couple key examples from my own research. I want to say at the outset that this is not going to be about uses of video for purposes of documentary filmmaking. That kind of videography is a very valuable thing, but it's a very different kind of use of video than what I've been involved in. And there's actually more literature about that sort of thing, and the semiotics of filmmaking and editing. It's a very different process, because in narrative storytelling videography, what you do is, even as you shoot individual strips of, used to be tape, now it's all digital, but I still use the metaphor of strips of tape, or of film, originally cinema film. What you do is you shoot relatively short takes with the idea that you're going to edit them together, and there are various possibilities for how you can put the pieces together in order most dramatically and effectively to tell a story. And you alternate close-ups and wider angle shots and so on. And there's a whole literature and a whole art history to that. But that's a different kind of use of audiovisual recording than what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about the uses of relatively unedited footage that is shot continuously and very often with a fairly wide-angle lens, as you'll see in a couple of the clips, and the camera doesn't move much. You don't do much what's called camera editing. In a group of people talking, you don't move between one speaker's face and another speaker's face like you do on kind of talk show television. You're trying to get a picture of the whole scene, the whole amoeba, because you're interested in the kind of real-time enactment of social interaction as an ecology of mutual influence among participants. And that is very consistent for educational research now with the current view of learning as participation, and increasingly central participation in a local community of practice of some kind. So that sort of neo-Vygotskian perspective on learning is very consonant with the kind of video shooting and the kind of video analysis that I've been involved in. But I want to give you an even broader view kind of the history of uses of audiovisual recording first, and then we'll look more at the kind of interactional sociolinguistic analysis that I've done. And as I talk about this history, I'm drawing on, sort of by memory, I'm drawing on a paper I wrote that was published in 2011 called Uses of Video in Social and Educational Research, A Brief History. And if you Google that, you can find it. And Sejong has, and Stacy have a copy of it. If you want to contact them, they can give it to you if you're interested later. But I was asked to write this kind of overview for a British Journal of Social Research Methodology, which your library may or may not have. But anyway, there was a special issue on video and multimodal discourse analysis. And I wrote this orienting chapter, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the highlights from history. The very first use of moving visual images for research purposes goes back really to the very beginnings of cinema film itself. And even before that, in the 1880s, Edward Muybridge, a British physiologist actually, was hired by Leland Stanford to photograph the gaits of Stanford's racehorses on his farm, which is now on the grounds of the Stanford University campus. And what he did was he rigged up a whole series of still cameras with strings attached, and as the horses ran across the strings and broke them, the shutters would click, and you got a series of microsecond pictures in sequence of the gaits of the horses. And that's the very first moving visual images that were used for a project of inquiry. In this case, Stanford wanted to figure out how to train his horses to win races better. Soon after that, cinema film was developed, and in the 1890s, late 1890s, there was an anthropological expedition to Melanesia and Micronesia in the South Pacific. In the Torres Straits, Alfred Haddon was the director of this very large project, and they took a cinema film camera with them and shot some footage. A few years after that, Franz Boas, one of the founders of American anthropology, made films of dancing and other kinds of ritual performance on the northwest coast of the Pacific among Native American tribal groups there, Haida and others. That was about 1905, I believe. And then there was a major study some years later by Gregory Bateson and Margaret Mead of apprenticeship into Balinese ritual dancing in their study of Balinese character that was published in 1942. They did the field work in the 1930s, and they had silent cinema film. This was all silent film. So this brings us to kind of the immediate post-World War II era, and we have two things that become technologically available. First of all, by then, sound cinema film had a good 15, 20 years of history, and relatively portable cinema. The 16 millimeter cameras were being equipped with sound, so you could carry them around to more sites than the big studio cameras in the movies. And so let's just think for a minute about the affordances of the visual image, even without sound. What it gives you is a continuous picture of the unfolding of activity over time, right? That's what the horses pictures were doing in this very crude way. And that's what cinema film does. If you you get a real-time record of what people can be seen to be doing. And so for various kinds of customary practices, ritual practices, or artistic displays, dance, and so on, or even a still film of metalworking, a blacksmith shaping molten metal on an anvil. You can get detailed information on the real-time, time after time occurrence of various kinds of behaviors. That's a great affordance. Part of the problem with it is everything is a trade-off. With affordances come constraints. The constraint is that this continuous record in real time is so potentially information rich that you can very quickly get overdosed with too much of it, right? And that's one of the beginner's mistakes that people make trying to use video or any kind of audiovisual recording or even audio recording. You record, as I said to students this morning, you record 31-hour interviews with people, and then you got 30 hours to listen to. What do you do with that? How do you handle selectivity? That becomes a fundamental problem in the use of these kinds of information sources. And it's very similar for audio tape. The audio tape also gives you a continuous record, but it's very continuity, pushes for some kind of systematic approach to selectivity. The other advantage of the audio recording and the visual recording, even without audio, is that the camera's eye and the audio recorder's ear are stupid and unselective. There's a selectivity when you turn the instruments on and off. That's a big decision. When does an event begin, right? Who are the central people? Where do you want to put the main picture framing? Those are human decisions. But once the machinery is on, the sounds that come, or whatever the sounds are, that equipment can pick up. The picture that comes is whatever light vibrations are there in the scene. It doesn't mean it's an objective record, but it does mean that it's absolutely continuous and it's not second guessing anything. And that's very different from a participant observer's field notes, which are necessarily highly selective. And once again, everything's a trade-off. You get much better information about your own patterns of paying attention, and eventually, in field work, other people's meaning perspectives, if you're doing the field work right, in field notes, than you do with turning on a video camera in the back of the room and letting it run for an hour. But what the dumb audiovisual recording device can do is give you continuity and not any second guessing, right? And you can learn to use that kind of information source together with other kinds of information sources very profitably, but they're different. And at any rate, both audiovisual recording and audio recording in social research are only a little more than 60 years old. The very first audio tape made to study ordinary conversation among people was made by a man named Soskin and Vera John. Vera John Steiner, who some of you may know of her work. Vera is still alive, but I think his name was Ed Soskin, and Vera John audio taped two people talking to each other in 1949. After the war, there began to become some recording equipment that had been developed during the war available. And what they did was they put this big recorder in a rowboat at a summer camp that the University of Chicago used to run somewhere near Waukegan on the Lake Michigan shore. And they had a battery running it that was the size of an automobile battery, right? And this whole thing weighed like 50 or 60 pounds. They put it in the rowboat, and the newlywed couple were in the rowboat. The husband was rowing, and the wife was riding. This was that long ago. That was gender-appropriate role relationships. And the husband is rowing with his face to the stern of the boat, and this is, wherever this was, it was near where the ferry came across from the Michigan shore to the Wisconsin shore, and the wife is saying, "The ferry is coming, you know, get the hell out of here," you know. And so they got some spontaneous speech that was really quite vivid, apparently. But that's 1949, and they didn't publish a report of it until an edited book volume that came out in 1963, right? So this is, even audio recording is that young. And audio-visual recording didn't get done for social research purposes until 1956. Interestingly, at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences on the Stanford campus, just up the hill looking down over Leland Stanford's former farm, by coincidence. And I'm going to discuss that in a minute. But first I want to show you just a little bit of silent film that was made right before that by Jürgen Reusch and Alan Keyes, who were collaborating with Gregory Bateson at this time in a group that was studying social interaction, and they were starting to develop an approach to family therapy. This just shows you some of what the visual image can do, even if you don't have sound. Okay, these are various approaches and leave takings.
The lights?
Yeah, put the lights down, maybe. About 1955, maybe 54. Jürgen Reusch and Weldon Keyes. Think of the kind of information that's here about social interaction. One of my teachers, Edward T. Hall, studied things like this. And so did Irving Goffman. And Goffman worked with Reusch and Keyes at this time. There's an approach. An invitation to play that has no uptake from the cat. Okay. I think this is the Berkeley campus in like 1954. Okay, there's an approach. This is a different kind of approach. I think this is maybe Telegraph Avenue. This poor communist is trying to get people to take his paper. Look at the cars. Right? So, but there's a lot of information here. If you wanted to really look closely and in slow motion repeatedly at these approaches, you could get quite a bit of information. There's no apparent uptake from the nun. Okay, so even without sound, cinema film, relatively continuously shot, can give us a lot of information. Here's now 1956, right after that. The first audio-visual recording made for research purposes that we know of was in a study group at the Center for Advanced Study called The Natural History of an Interview. And it consisted of 2 psychiatrists, 2 linguists, and 2 anthropologists. Gregory Bateson had been working with Roish Keyes at the Veterans Hospital, which is still there in Palo Alto. And they had by then some footage that they were preparing as part of this development of family therapy approach. And Bateson let the people at the center use that footage, and one of the pieces that they used was an interview between Bateson and a mother whose son had, there was some question about whether the son was hyperactive, maybe we might call him nowadays. And she had gotten involved with this study and gave permission to have Bateson interview her with the little boy there, and they would film it and then study the interaction process. And unfortunately, my copy of this, something went wrong. I just found out last night here, and there's very bad interference on the sound, so I'm shutting the sound off, but this just gives you a sense of the footage. Okay, so this is only for research use, but we're all researchers, it's all right. It's a long time ago, as you can see. So there's the mother and the little boy, and he's got a toy airplane he plays with a little bit, and a cap pistol, and Bateson is listening to the mother and watching the little boy. She's talking about the little boy, and they're sitting on the couch, and this was about a 20-minute interview that was filmed with audio, and that's what the footage looks like. Now, what they did with this was to continuously transcribe. I'm not going to show you the transcripts, but they continuously transcribed one of the linguists did a phonetic transcription using phonetic symbols of every speech sound on the audio track. And then there was a phonemic transcript that's more like the modern transcribing of words that we can read as words. Then there was a narrative commentary written over time by Bateson, kind of like field note commentary, and clinical commentary by the psychiatrists. Every now and then they would say, well, this shows this clinical possibility or that. And so they just transcribed continuously the verbal and then Ray Birdwhistle did a micro-transcript of gesture, body orientation, gaze, all kinds of nonverbal behavior. And that was second by second, microsecond by microsecond, continuous. So they had these overlays of continuous transcript because, and the reason for it was that they, we can turn the lights on for a minute again. They didn't want to presume that in meaning making in human social interaction, talk was more important than nonverbal behavior, or certain aspects of talk, or certain aspects of nonverbal behavior. So they wanted just continuous transcribing, and then they would try to figure it out. Well, they spent 12 years trying to figure it out. The study was never published. It resides still as a big, thick manuscript in the Regenstein Library at the University of Chicago. When I was a graduate student in the 1960s at Northwestern, I drove down to the library and sat there for an afternoon with it in front of me and looked at it and fell asleep, actually, as I was. It's very rough. But Margaret Mead ended up working on it with Bateson, and it was the first systematic attempt to study interaction from this point of view. From then on, just quickly, people like Albert Shefflin, a psychiatrist who had worked some with Birdwhistle, continued in this tradition. Adam Kendon is another name in what came to be called context analysis, how people in interaction form contexts for each other in the 1960s. Then in the next generation, late 60s, myself, Ray McDermott, Bud Meehan, Charles Goodwin, Candy Goodwin, they had both studied with Birdwhistle at Penn. We started using video because video had just become available. And in 1968, when I was still a doctoral student at Northwestern, I made my first videotape of a small group of kids talking to each other. And I'd had a whole series of audio recordings of these group meetings. And we transcribed them, we listened to them, and came to be studying what we would now call persuasive discourse patterns in what they were doing, and it was in order to do that, I really needed to be able to see who the speakers were orienting to as they were talking. There were audiences voting yes and no on what various speakers said in these arguments in the group. And when I made having made all these audio tapes for my dissertation, I made the one videotape with an Ampex studio tape recorder that, as I remember it, had a 2-inch wide tape. The reels were about this big around, and there was a great big studio camera on a huge tripod, nothing like that. And this was a movable, right? And we brought the kids' discussion group up from the south side of Chicago, gave them Coke and pizza, and had them talk for 40 minutes in front of this big camera. And the next morning I looked at the tape, and it was like heavens had opened. There was this revelation, because I could see who was orienting to whom. I could see listening reactions as the speakers were speaking. And it gave me a whole new way to understand how people made meaning together in interaction. And so I became a believer, and I'm going to show you some footage pretty quickly from work done not too long after that. At any rate, in those days, the equipment was so bulky that you really had to study scenes in which, people came to the camera. You couldn't take the camera to people. It was a little bit like the rowboat problem for the audio recording. And but by the very late 60s and early 70s, you began to have somewhat portable equipment. Sony made a portable half-inch reel-to-reel recorder that you could have on a bandolier over your shoulder with a camera, and you could walk around with it. And our first videotaping in a school classroom was done with that kind of equipment. We're now, and I'm coming to the end of the history, we're now at the point where the technology has changed so with digitization and so on that I wanted to mention just one more kind of a little bit younger than the good ones and Bud and McDermott and myself, but another person who used video very profitably a while back was Lucy Suchman. Some of you may know of her studies of workplace interaction. Very interesting work. And she did her doctoral dissertation at Berkeley on a series of videotapes of people using the first Xerox machine that made back-to-back copies and would put a staple on the thing. You could do a whole job, at once. And it was sold as a self-teaching machine. It would tell you exactly what to do step by step as you were using it. Well, of course, it didn't. And there's this wonderful video in her one of her examples at Xerox Park. One of the visiting scholars there was Arthur Newell, who was a Nobel Prize winner, one of the early cognitive psychologists, Newell and Simon. Arthur Newell is trying to make a 25-page paper in a back-to-back copy. And he has a junior assistant with him, and he can't do it. And this thing goes on for like 20 minutes, and it's very funny footage to see this famous smart man being outsmarted by the Xerox machine. So it's good at documenting practices. But now we have equipment with wireless microphones, cameras that also can broadcast wirelessly. And my colleague Rogers Hall, who is now at Vanderbilt, was at Berkeley doing, this was about 15, 20 years ago. He did a study of with moving video footage and audio recording. He was studying work practices of work groups, and he worked with a group of field entomologists. They go around and look at bugs out in nature, right? And when the bugs fly, they have to run after them. So he's got this footage of with his graduate students with portable cameras. They're running after the entomologists who are running after the bugs, and you can hear what the entomologists are saying on the wireless microphones, and it's like a whole different thing again. It's like the heliocentric universe versus the Earth-centric universe. And now, Rogers, one of his most recent studies is of distributed cognition in a group of middle school students who are riding bicycles through downtown, where's Vanderbilt? Yeah. They're riding through downtown Nashville. They each have a little broadcast camera on a cap, so you can see the rider's eye view of what's going on the street and the other riders, and they're all wired up on sound, and he's recorded all of this, and you can see simultaneously how they're communicating with each other and warning each other about this bus that's going to turn at the corner and how, what are we going to do about that, and so on. And it permits the study of distributed cognition, in a radically distributed way, and so we are now able to do those kinds of things that we couldn't in the early days, and some of it's not so nice. There are studies of shopping behavior where they videotape continuously people walking around a store and use that to redesign selling spaces. Capitalism has found a way to use this kind of information collection and analysis, and you can get jobs as ethnographers doing this. Actually, there are studies in nature of things like real-time documentation of tidal pools and what's happening from second to second across 24 hours with a tidal pool. That kind of information, time over time, this recording is really good for. It's also really good for surveillance recording. And in Europe, England and the continent, now we know there's all kinds of surveillance video all the time that the state is using to keep track of people. And it's also being used by militaries all over the world. And there's a big industry in the Silicon Valley of face recognition software to be able to pick out certain individuals on huge databases of video that's being shot, and that stuff's not so nice to think about, right? And then finally, nowadays, everybody has one of these, right? So the good part of this is, for this kind of work, it's no longer a weird thing to be videotaped. Everybody's videotaping everybody. And sometimes the very surveillance kind of video can have good uses, like the North Charleston tape of the policeman shooting 8 times a man running away from him. One of the things about video is that it can be persuasive as a source of evidence for the existence of certain kinds of practices. But it's also not absolutely obvious. There was video shot of the Rodney King Beating Institute, and my colleague Charles Goodwin did an analysis of the court, the defense lawyers for the cops, ways of showing that by slow motion to try to persuade the jury that it showed evidence that King was trying to get up and therefore resisting arrest, and that's why he was continuously being beat with the batons. And it was ambiguous enough that he could make that case to the jury, and they believed it. So seeing can be too much believing. We have to be careful about that. All right, let me just, I'm gonna run over a little bit, but I mean a little bit more than an hour. But I want to show you something that's easier to see than the Rodney King thing, of evidence about learning that comes from some recent footage that that I've been working on, and tomorrow I'm going to show the website that shows more of this. This is showing the teaching of physics of matter, energy, and motion in the UCLA lab school with kindergarten and first graders, 5 and 6 year olds. We won't do this one. I want to show you just a very simple display of direct evidence of children understanding a basic issue. That at the beginning of the year, they studied matter, and they studied matter in various states and transformation from solid to liquid to a gas, right? And the metaphor for this, the motion of molecules as heat is added to a piece of matter, as heat is added, the molecules move faster and in greater amplitude, and that was metaphorically called dancing by the teachers. So there was dancing molecules is what made matter change state, and the kids have learned this. And one of the parents happens to be a physics professor at UCLA, and he's come to do a little demonstration with the kids. And he does all kinds of whiz-bang stuff. But at the beginning, he does a little thing with dancing molecules because he knows about the metaphor. And we're going to see that. And we can see behavioral evidence that kids understand that because they've already danced as molecules before. Okay, now, why isn't there sound?
Before you just tap that.
Oh, did I? There we go.
Okay. Now launches your solid, so you just sit there holding hands, okay? It's a little piece of solid, only 4 molecules in it. Each one of these guys is supposed to be like a molecule, okay? Now, you're going to become a liquid, okay? So start moving. Okay, hold hands for a bit, and not hold hands for a bit, and hold hands for a bit. You're moving around. You're liquid. Okay. Now, I'm going to add some heat to you. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put you because you're now water. Okay. Now I'm going to heat you up still further. And what's going to happen? That's it. Right. So when you hit me. So you're not.
Okay, so we can see that the kids jump, and they jump, he says, what's going to happen? And they animate the dancing molecules. This stuff is especially persuasive and powerful when we can combine it with other sources of evidence. Participant observation, interviewing, and we talked to kids, we watched them, and here's, I don't know why it isn't responding. Here's, oh, there we go. Okay, and Eli is one of the kids in one of the classrooms, and Eli did. First, let's look at Amber. Amber did a 2-dimensional representation of her understanding about the dancing molecules, and this is what she shows us, right? She says, this is what the molecules look like in a solid. here's what they look like in a liquid, and here's what they look like in a gas. Okay, so that's further confirmation that the kids actually are getting the point of this motion of molecules idea. And here's Eli modeling in clay and wire the motion of molecules in a solid. That's Eli's solid. Here's Eli's liquid. Okay, the molecules are moving farther and faster, and then you add more heat, and it's transformed into a gas, and there's Eli's gas, right? And the molecules are all over the place. And then we can add cite documents. He wrote about this too, and this was multiple semiosis in the teaching of these key ideas. So he says, he writes, he's 5 years old, he writes, solids are close together. My solid is very close together. My liquid is a little bit and a little bit far apart. My gas is very spread apart. Okay? So we've got, we can bring a multiplicity of information sources together with the audiovisual recording as a way of understanding some things about teaching and learning. Let me just conclude with something from my earlier work, and I'll just go back and find it again. I had it up, but here we go. Now this is kind of more like anthropology. I had the opportunity to do a study of teaching and cultural patterns in classroom interaction. I'll just leave it here for the moment. In a school on Manitoulin Island on the north shore of Lake Huron. This was in 1976. We were invited by a Native American Cultural Foundation who had found out about our kind of classroom research to come and document the teaching with a classroom of Native American students by a Native American teacher. There were a number of Native American teachers in an elementary school there, and the principal was Native American. This was an Odawa reserve, Ottawa, Odawa. It's culturally and linguistically very similar to Ojibwa, and Odawa tribal communities and Ojibwa ones are all over northern Michigan, northern Ontario, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, northern Wisconsin, and northern Minnesota. At any rate, we were interested in the ways, we became interested in the ways that social control was exercised by teachers in the classroom. And we had two teachers literally door to door, back to back, the classrooms. One was an Indian grandmother, an Odawa elder from this community, and the other was a man, and he was younger, so there's an age and a gender difference, but there are also some differences in the way that they approached classroom management and control that were very, very different. And the video that we collected manifested this, and I want to just take you through it and sort of show you what we did with it. So here's the very big, that's, don't worry about that. Here we go. Beginning of the day. take this to the office, she said. The attendance sheet.
Put the chair down now. Somebody gets hurt. Maybe. You people don't want to watch your dogs. Who's sitting here, Robert? Yeah. Must be his. We'll give it to him. Okay, we'll stand up. We'll say our prayers now. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. On our calendar, what's the next number? 10. And this is March 10th. Somebody's got these all mixed. Today is Wednesday. How many in the grade 1s are putting the date in their book? I noticed some books you forget to put it, and I put down March 10. And this is 1976. Now we don't have this on the calendar, but we put it in our book. This is the year 1976. In your printing, this word. You remember what this is from yesterday? You made a picture, people playing. What's that first letter? Here. Anybody remember the picture they made? Right. This is hockey. The one with the big letter and the one with the small letter. Hockey.
Okay, so that's a couple minutes worth of the beginning of the school day in Gertrude's class, that was her name. Just a couple of things. How many people are wondering whether she's really interested in what she's doing or not? Have you wondered about that? Right. I showed this at the National Institute of Education in 1978 when Sylvia Scribner, or 79, when Sylvia Scribner was the program officer for a whole set of studies of cultural differences in teaching style. And I was asked to come and give a talk, and I played this clip, and I stopped like this, and I said, "What do you notice? What does it look and sound like to you?" Which I've done forever. There was a pause, and the man at the very back of the room, there were about 30 people there, he said, "Well, it's obvious this woman is clinically depressed." And I said, "Oh, well, that's interesting. What was it, in the way it looked and sounded like that gives you that impression?" And he said, "Well, the way she walks, she has these sighs that she gives, and she's clearly, I said, "Okay, and what do you do here?" And he said, "Well, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm on leave from such and such university here for the year to help advise people on this." I then went on to say some things about behaviorally why he might have gotten that impression and why you may have. One of the things about the way she moves and talks is that she doesn't use much pitch variation in her voice, okay? And this is also culturally customary in the community. This is where you need to have participant observation to go with video footage, or you could do all kinds of crazy inferences without additional sources of information. In this community, and very widely across North America. There's a pattern in Native American everyday interaction of not varying pitch as you talk the way white people do. And they make fun of white people doing what we do behind our backs. And as you get to know people, you know, and in fact, if there's pitch variation in this community, it was associated with people being so angry and upset, and maybe also drunk, that you're just at the very last thing before you lose it, you know, and a fight would start, or people would really holler at each other and say terrible things to each other. It's the precursor to losing it emotionally entirely. And this is so different from the cultural pattern of early grades teachers in Anglo-American and Anglo-Canadian classrooms, isn't it? What I call the early grades pitch roller coaster, right? You could imagine her starting the class by saying, "Good morning, boys and girls. First we're going to say our prayers, and then we'll have our calendar, and then we'll have a reading word," right? And we came to understand as field workers that if she did something like that, especially in the first couple days of school, kids would freak out. Right? They'd be scared. With, you know, this is a danger signal. So see, she doesn't do the pitch variation. She also doesn't accelerate and decelerate. You know, the way teachers walk around the room sometimes, and it's very, very much timed. We actually timed this, and there are rhythm patterns that are very regular. They sustained over 30-second cycles, 60-second cycles, 180-second cycles. And it's just sort of beautifully timed, but if you didn't know to look for the timing, it would just look like she's really slow. And maybe she's bored, right? A couple other things about what she does that you saw. You didn't see her call on a named individual child for a content question. She asks about the calendar, she asks about the word on the board, hockey, and it's addressed, always the content questions addressed to the whole group. Never a named individual. And also you didn't see any directives addressed to a named individual child in the whole group, only up close. She says, when she's over here by the table, she says to the little kid with the attendance sheet, "Take this to the office." That's a directive. But she's very close, and she does it at a very low volume, and in fact we put a wireless mic on her because we couldn't hear what she was saying when she did stuff like that to the kids. We had an overhead mic here suspended from the ceiling. You couldn't hear any of those things that she said. So anyway, so we ended up visiting repeatedly and doing some field work. It was limited field work. My colleague Jerry Mohat on this work had years of acquaintance with communities like this, and he helped. And Native American teachers from this school who were from other classrooms in summer workshops helped us analyze these videotapes as kind of practitioner research with us. The upshot is we had, I think, 13 hours of video of the beginnings of school days, or from right after lunch until an hour after school started in the afternoon with this teacher. And in this 13 hours, she never addresses a content question to a named individual in the whole group. Never once. And only twice to does she do something like, Jimmy put the pencil down, a directive to an individual kid. And it was this little boy that she gave what our Native American research assistants said was the look. I don't know whether you saw that, but right before they do the prayer, she looks at him, and it's like helium comes in his shoulders. He stands up. He had been writing something. There's a fundamental principle of social organization in these communities that you don't order people around. You leave people choice time to comply with what's going on around them. You don't put them on the spot. And the closest she comes to is just by giving him the look. But he gets, in 13 hours, 2 little kind of gentle, put the pencil down or stand up, Jimmy. In contrast, in 10 hours of tape, next door, we have a very different kind of pattern, and here's what that looks like. He's doing the morning attendance sheet.
Okay, guys, let's look at the words. Put the books away. Wait for me now. Leroy, put the pencil down. Rodney. Michael, put that away. Rodney, put that away. Put that away. Put it away. Okay, put it away. We can make Christmas decorations after. Natalie. Okay, I'm sure everybody knows these easy words. Oh, what is that?
Okay, a very different social ecology, right? And it's contributed to by the way he behaves and also the way the kids are acting. But notice that he says, okay, let's read these easy words, and then he starts doing the directives to Rodney, put the pencil down, and so on. And over a course of 36 seconds while he's doing that, kids are starting to read, right? They're coming up and they're doing bed, fed, ted, pat, sat, mat. And then he says, wait for me now, because the principle of social organization here is that I'm the teacher and I get to say when events begin, right? And when I ask a question, I get to say when you answer, right? And if you answer before I've asked the question or signaled that an answer slot should be appearing in the next moment in time downstream, that's a social problem, and I have to fix that as a teacher. In Gertrude's room, in the earlier room, I don't know if you noticed, but the kids started answering about the day of the week and the date on the calendar. Before she asked, she said, on your calendar. She walks over and kids start saying 10, Wednesday, Friday, and we get a whole set of answers in the air before she's actually asked a question. And for her, that's not a social problem, right? Again, because there's this principle that people can choose when they want to act, and you don't interfere with that too much, right? So it turned out that as we looked at the 10 hours of video for him, and we looked at directives cast across the room, his base rate was something like 4 per minute over 10 hours. And in 13 hours with Gertrude next door, it's 2 in 13 hours, right? Very, very different. And also he addresses kids by name, and he asks He does content questions to named tables. Here we go.
Matt, like mommy. Okay. Sammy's table stand. Sammy's table. Very good.
Okay, now I won't go into it, but he at the beginning of the year he was calling on individual kids, and they were starting to clam up, which other researchers had found at this time, and he started at the suggestion of the principal, who was Odawa, calling on table groups instead of individuals, and that worked. It was a little cultural adaptation, was our interpretation. It was entirely intuitive on his part. He wasn't thinking about trying to be culturally responsive. She suggested it, and it worked, and so he kept it. At any rate, the point is, here we had interview information from the teachers about their orientation to teaching and social control. We had some ethnography. We had other studies of similar reservation communities in the ethnographic literature that confirmed this assertion that we made, that there are fundamentally different principles of social control that are operating in these communities from the way school considers the sort of Western European notions of how adults control groups of kids in school. And it sort of all added up and made sense. But what we didn't just ask people to believe that with the basis of two little clips. We went through every minute of every videotape we had to see how many directives, at what rates of time, and so on, and whether there were content questions, and if they were content questions, were they directed to the entire group or to a named individual or to a table group. And we added all that up. We put it in simple frequency tables, and it was a combination of field work, other people's field work, interview information, and video. And on the basis of that, we felt we could make some pretty strong statements about pattern. But we weren't just giving one little anecdote from each room and saying, you know, that's the way it is. It's really different in the two rooms. Just believe me, right? We tried to put evidentiary cards on the table, and that's all we have time for. But the audiovisual recording has wonderful affordances. It also can easily overdose you with potential information, so you've got to figure out systematic ways to be selective about what you pay attention to in the records, but you can do that, and you can come up with amassing evidence that is persuasive to people, and so there it is. We got 15 minutes for questions and comments, and some people need to leave, obviously. If you do, by all means, go. I don't take that personally. But if you'd like to stay for a few minutes and talk, I'm happy to. Yes?
Dr. Erickson, can you talk a bit about that selectivity, how systematic selectivity? Are there certain lenses that you apply first, or a standard set of questions you ask yourself as you approach the analysis of video?
Yeah, there are. And did we have the handout of resources? Yeah. There's some things on that list that address that, particularly somebody give me, yeah, thanks. Particularly that first one. Sharon Derry, who used to teach here, and a bunch of us wrote a special issue of the Journal of the Learning Sciences, and there's a section in there on selectivity that's actually, I think, works very well. Also, my 1992 article, just below that, Ethnographic Microanalysis of Interaction, explains a particular approach that I've used, and also the 2007 Erickson Ways of Seeing Video, and 2006 Definition and Analysis of Data from Videotape. That's also about selection. And then my 1977 paper with Jeff Schultz called When is a Context is the earliest in the literature that I know of that describes kind of the approach that we took to looking analytically at this minimally edited footage. And so that gives you some background. There's some much more recent work now that I've got here on the list, but those are some classic citations, and this fairly recent thing by Sharon Derry, Roy P., and others, that first item, has a nice description of the issue of selection. So, good question. What else? Yeah.
Yeah. So I appreciate the history of all this, and I feel like you were too modest with your, including yourself in that history. And I feel like Frederick Weissman's work on Titicut Follies and the study of the psychiatric institution, and then your work on the interethnic communication were sort of the path-breaking sort of studies to look at the micro interactions of sort of how an institution is embodied in these ecologies of social interaction. And I guess one thing I wanted to ask you about was the sort of the influence on that earlier work of like observational cinema and cinema verite, and I'm sort of picturing you going into these offices. You have this large camera that makes a lot of noise, and you're in I can tell from the footage that you're in close proximity to the interaction that's happening, and it's sort of that scene sort of questions some of the assumptions of cinema verite. That's like there's this objective record that's being created, and so that's one question is sort of your thinking on your earlier work in terms of the influence of documentary cinema. Mead and Bateson. Mead was very sort of positivistic about all that. At one point, she's like, "Let's just leave the camera, set it up on a tripod in the village, and just let it run." And that's objective evidence.
Yeah. Well, it isn't objective evidence, but it is relatively consistent, and sometimes that consistency is important. So. But that's Fred Wiseman and I were both in Cambridge at the same time. I remember when the high school film came out, and a couple of the others, and I was in a more hard science mode in those days than I am now. I wanted to use minimally edited footage because I knew already that you can, by editing, really shape the viewer's overall impressions of a place. Now, I think Fred Wiseman's work was very persuasive to me. I liked that. But there's other work that's more heavy-handed in cinema verite. We used to say cinema verite as kind of ironically. It isn't verite. And in fact, the Harvard motto is Veritas. And we had a little sign in my research group workroom that said "In video veritas," but we meant it ironically. We didn't think we were getting capital T truth. But we were able to get at some things about the details of the performance of everyday life, as you know. I know the kind of work you do, that you simply couldn't get. I should have said this probably early on. The problem with your field notes as an observer is that everyday life goes lots faster than you can write notes on. And if you're looking at relatively subtle things about how people do things, and in this case, you know, how you teach, how you set up a learning community for people, you need to be able to get at some of those subtleties. And it's really, it's not impossible to take field notes that track some of that, but it's really nice to have some video footage to go with it, check yourself back and forth and so on. So I'm an admirer of Fred Wiseman, but I decided I wanted to do something with this more minimally edited footage.
Can I tack on one more quick one?
Yeah.
So with the cold, like with the bird whistle and Bateson and the work that they did at the Eastern Pennsylvania Psychiatric Institute,
Yeah.
I know some of that was funded by the State Department. They wanted to find out if this evidence of this filmic evidence of social interaction, particularly nonverbal aspects of it, could be used for better interrogation practices.
Right.
And also, like with the Cold War sort of scientizing of American psychiatry, which was really sort of mobilized in that during World War II and after World War II. I'm just wondering if you thought at all about the sort of the geopolitical context of this use of video.
Well, I did think of it very much in the 60s when I was starting to do my interethnic research. You're referring, among other things, I think, to my first book, which is called The Counselor's Gatekeeper. I didn't put that on this list, but I thought there was enough shameless self-advertising in here already. So, but that's what academics do, right? Shameless self-promotion. Anyway, people came to me as the Vietnam War was winding down and said, "Oh, you know, you could get a lot of money from the Office of Naval Research to develop training materials to teach these soldiers who are coming back to America, and you could teach, you know, black soldiers how to talk to a white interviewer in a job interview." And I said, "I'm sorry, if I was going to do anything, I would teach interviewers how to, you know, listen to how people make sense differently in different stylistic ways, communicatively." And they weren't really interested in that. Yeah, there was some of this, just like now, behind the new work with big digital video databases and machine analysis of them. The military is very interested in that. Paul Ekman is another person who got a lot of money he claimed he could, through seeing still photographs of people's faces, he could tell you whether they were lying or not. And the military intelligence people really spend a lot of money on stuff like that. I never took any of that money, and I'm glad I didn't. But at the time, you know, that was very much out there. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
One more? Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought was really fascinating about the history is that we're getting obviously closer and closer to the point where the camera technology can be very individualized, and that gives us a different sense of what's happening and gets us into different spaces. And I have the unenviable, exciting role of sitting on our Human Subjects Review Board. And there's a pretty strong movement across quite a number of school districts to basically start banning video use in classrooms for a number of different reasons, but one of them being that there are students who, for religious reasons, do not want to be videotaped, and the school feels that the easiest solution to this is just to ban videotape. and concerns about new technologies that can be moved a little too easily to see
Right,
things that shouldn't
right.
be seen and so forth. So as we enter this new technological era where theoretically more and more types of studies are open, but schools seem less and less open to letting them in, I wonder what you think a solution might be to, if it's important to be able to use these technologies in schools,
Yeah.
to be able to get districts and schools a little bit more comfortable again with them and what they can do for us.
Okay, I talked about this a little bit with in the student group this morning, so I'll just recap that a little bit. I was on the IRB for UCLA for a number of years, and we had actually during my time the chairs of those committees were the two different ones were anthropologists. They were ethnographers, so we didn't have any problem with that. And during that time, Eleanor Oaks and company got a big grant to study people's households and everyday life in families, with a large grant from the Sloan Foundation, and we were able to work out reasonable consent relationships there. And I've done it with schools over and over. What I've tried to do, what we tried to do there on the board, and what I tried to do in my own work, was have consent agreements that were very clear about who gets to see the footage, when and where. Okay, and I would go around saying, you know, videotaping doesn't hurt people. X-ray hurts people, right? Blood draws potentially could hurt people, but simply having this on isn't going to hurt me, isn't going to hurt you. What hurts is who gets to see it under what circumstances, right? And if it's going to be on the evening news tonight, or if it's immediately going to be on YouTube or Facebook or something. I don't do Facebook, but you know, that's one of the things now that people are worrying about. But my agreements with teachers and with school districts have always been very careful to say who gets to see what footage when. And with the lab school, we got parental consent to put the website on the internet, right? So we were very upfront about it. And this was, we thought, exemplary teaching. And you got to see kids doing really interesting stuff and showing capacities at a young age for things that some people didn't think they were capable of, and so it was going to be kind of celebratory. But anyway, well, the parents signed off. We had one parent, you saw a kid on the footage of the dancing molecules who was the son of a movie star. And that family gave consent right away. There's another kid in the room who was off camera in that shot because his parents hadn't, he had a slight learning difficulty, and his parents initially during the year didn't want him to be in on this. They were afraid somebody might see footage. As time went on, and the woman in the couple, who I won't say who it was, everybody would recognize her name, but as she saw us and what we were really doing, she ended up giving consent about a month, 2 months into the study. So her son John appears every now and then. But that was the other thing we did. We said, we don't have to shoot everybody. If your kid has a religious thing about not being photographed or not being videotaped, we'll just shoot from angles so that we are sure that the kid is never on screen. So at any rate, if the consent agreements are really explicit about how the shooting will be done, who will get to see it when, you can do it in an ethically responsible way. And in this latter case, we got absolute agreement. And in the case of Gertrude, now think about this. This is 1976, and these two white guys show up, sponsored admittedly by the local cultural foundation, the Odawa Cultural Foundation, and the principal, her principal, who was Native American, knew my student then, colleague, Jerry Mohat, and trusted him. But she didn't really know us from Adam, and she let us come in and videotape, and then she let her fellow teachers watch it the next summer, two, 3 summers after that. And she wanted to be able to show how an elder would do this culturally, okay? And when she died, I called her son and I said, now I've been using this in my teaching for years, and other people have, and there was a whole teacher education program at the University of Alaska that took this approach to culturally responsive pedagogy, partly informed by our work. And Jerry Mohat eventually became the dean of the ed school up there. And so I asked her son if it would be okay with him to continue to show this to people. And he said, yes, his mother would want that. And so, you know, we followed through on our commitments to be sensitive about who got to see what, under what conditions. Just to tell you one reason I cry, what the clinical psychologist heard as sighs are out-breaths from the early onset of a condition that later leads to congestive heart failure, which is what she died from maybe eight years after this was shot. And what happens is that water vapor builds up in the lungs a little bit because of this condition, and involuntarily you do out-breaths. Phenomenally, they sound like sighs, right? Behaviorally, I think it was something else. And again, that's why you need field work. That's why you need acquaintance with people. To know what they're doing means isn't simply obvious from the audiovisual record. And that when I teach, I make a big point about that. Everybody heard it as a sigh, didn't they? Well, of course you would. You know, that's how we make sense. We hear that kind of sound. That's what in everyday experience we think that means. But in her case, there's something else going on. And if you know that, then you can learn to hear it as an out-breath, as we did. And that's to get interpretive validity in your analysis, hermeneutical validity, which is the basic Malinowskian aim for ethnography. So anyway, that's, I think we should stop, but that's a nice moral to end on. It underscores why first-hand acquaintance and a variety of information sources, complemented by audiovisual recording, can be very powerful. But if you just rely, I'm worried now. I have students I'm teaching a video analysis course at just finished at Georgetown in the linguistics department, and some of my students, for practice footage, have taken things off YouTube, and it's wonderful. One of them has English driving lessons, and the interaction between the driving instructor and the teacher, there's a camera, you know, over the rearview mirror looking at, we can see them, and it's really neat stuff. There's also the footage from the Trayvon Martin trial, where cross-examination, the defense attorney is beating up on the chief prosecution witness, the young woman that was Trayvon's friend, and she is doing a compelling analysis of that, but she doesn't have any other material. She doesn't have first-hand information, and I don't think, just in general, that's a good idea. Thank you for your attention. I study listening behavior. Your listening behavior was wonderful.